Let's get to your article. So this is great, Reed. It's in Common Dreams right now. It's called The Treason of the Ruling Class. And the subheading is They Have Destroyed Our Capitalist Democracy and Replaced It with a Mafia State. The ruling class no longer has legitimacy. They have destroyed our capitalist democracy and replaced it with a mafia state. What the Roman philosopher Cicero called a commonwealth, a res publica, a public thing, or the property of a people, has been transformed into an instrument of naked pillage and repression on behalf of a global corporate oligarchy. We are serfs ruled by obscenely rich, omnipotent masters who loot the U.S. Treasury, pay little or no taxes, and have perverted the judiciary, the media, and the legislative branches of government to strip us of civil liberties and give them the freedom to commit financial fraud and theft, the loss of control over systems of rulership, the misuse of all democratic institutions, the electoral process and laws to funnel money upwards into a handful of oligarchs while stripping us of power ominously means that the ruling elites can no longer claim the right to have a monopoly on violence. Violence employed by police and security agencies such as the FBI, which have devolved into occupying forces to protect the exclusive interests of a tiny ruling criminal class, exposes the fiction of the rule of law and the treason of the ruling class. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience, Stokely Carmichael warned. And if your opponent is bereft of a conscience, then state violence is inevitably met with counter-violence. Tyranny takes the place of reform. The danger of widespread sectarian violence in America is now very real. How long can you expect people to watch their children go hungry? How long can you expect people to watch their loved ones suffer and die because they can't get medical care? How long can you expect people to be abused by lawless police and a court system designed to railroad the poor into jails and prisons? How long can you watch the rich profit from your misery? I would prefer that our revolution eschew the poison of violence, which I know too intimately from my 2 decades as a war correspondent, but I also know that when everything around you conspires to crush you, the only way left to affirm yourself is to destroy not only the structures and institutions that have oppressed you, but often yourself. Okay, so let's stop there. Let's talk about that. So you say the ruling elite has lost all legitimacy and their monopoly on violence. So go ahead and explain that a little bit more.
Well, because that defines government in its modern term, and that is that it has the monopoly on violence. It alone has the right to use violence. But it can only essentially claim that right if the government represents the consent and the will of the governed. Once it no longer does, then its legitimacy to monopolize violence is mute. And at that point, it becomes tyranny. And that's, I would say, we no longer live in a democracy. We live in a kind of form of corporate totalitarianism. Both parties are complicit. And therefore, the violence that they are using in the name of, combating unrest and keeping peace is essentially to protect the interests of this tiny, rapacious criminal class that runs the country. And so and I think that in the streets, especially among the millennials, they get it. This is very different from the 1960s, because in the 1960s, the country was affluent enough that, you could get thrown out of college, or you could be a protester and then go on and make a middle class living. You see figures like John Kerry, who's, his moral height was Winter Soldier, and his powerful testimony in front of Congress, and it's been all downhill from there. He's now one of the richest people in the Senate. So even the black leadership class was bought off. But now, because there's been such a monopolization of wealth, nobody can get bought off. And these kids out in the street are fully aware that they have no opportunities, nowhere to go, that this is, Biden is, there's a whole paragraph in that story on everything Biden's done, including passing all of the crime bills and death penalty bills and expanding police forces and capital crimes and everything. It was all Biden. And he wasn't a bystander, by the way. Biden sponsored and pushed this legislation. So, but the millennials and the kids, they get it. That these people have, these oligarchic rulers, this corporate oligarchy has stolen their future, has thwarted any possibility of them finding a meaningful place within the society, of actualizing themselves, of affirming them, of allowing them to pursue whatever their dreams are. It's all been shut down. So it's very different from the 60s, and therefore far more ominous, because as corrupt and awful as the government was in the 1960s, there was still enough of a liberal class within the Democratic Party to be able to respond, not in significant ways, but enough to ameliorate the worst of the suffering. Now that's gone. There's no. So I look at this situation as kind of unprecedented within American society. And let me just say, this was originally posted on Robert Scheer's site, Scheer Post, which after we were all fired, I'm not making this up, after we all fired from Truthdig, you set up with his Social Security checks. So I know you have a deep reach in the billionaire class, so maybe somebody out there watching can go write him a check. And we all write for it. It's kind of a mom and pop thing. But anyway, it was originally on Scheer Post, yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that Scheer Post had started.
Yeah. Him and his kids do it.
Fantastic. That's great. That, Bob Scheer doesn't need a billionaire. So do you think other people see the same thing that you're talking about that the state has lost their monopoly on violence and that it's legitimate? So, because I keep thinking to myself, if you see 6 cops running down a dark street at you, you better protect yourself. So, I mean, I don't know what what am I supposed to do as a citizen if I see 6 cops running at me in full riot gear with clubs, and they're gonna maybe even kill me. They might, do whatever. So when do people get to use violence against the police preemptively? Because you can see, well, like for instance, we saw that horrible video of those two college kids in Atlanta. Like, it's horrific. They break their windows. They tase both of them. They break the girl's wrist. The guys just unbelievable violence I couldn't conceive in a game, in a video game, was being perpetrated on camera to 2 kids who did absolutely nothing. And by the way, now all those 4 cops have been charged. But my point is, so now if you see a cop and he tells you to stop, we saw people running cops over now because cops have been running crowds over and doing whatever they want. So now people are legitimately fearful of the police when they see them. And is it legitimate for them to use violence against police?
I wouldn't use the word legitimate. I would just, and this was the point of the piece, that when you shut every avenue for reform down, when people recognize that they're completely trapped, it is inevitable that they will use counter violence. Now, that often can be, and usually is, I think, self-destructive, but it's the only way left. It is the ruling elites who determine the configurations of resistance. And if they don't offer the possibility of addressing the suffering and creating some kind of restitution, then that's what they're going to get. I'm not going to put a moral quality on it. I'm deeply opposed to violence, having been around a lot of it. On the other hand, I was in Sarajevo during the war. We were completely surrounded by the Serbs, who were shelling the city with 2,000 shells a day, constant sniper fire, 4 to 5 dead a day, 24 wounded a day. It was a trench system, literally. We knew that if the Serbs broke through past those trenches, a third of the city would be slaughtered and the rest would be driven into refugee and displacement camps. And that wasn't conjecture, because that's what they did in Vukovar, it's what they did in the Drina Valley. So at that point, you pick up a gun. I get it. We were being bombed in Sarajevo. People were not sitting around in basements having long discussions about pacifism. At the same time, that doesn't protect you from the poison of violence. And that's what I worry, that the ruling elites are so tone deaf, so myopic, so out of touch, and let me put Joe Biden at the top of the list, that they won't respond